Welcome to Mayhem CEDH, where questionable decks meet questionable pilots. For this week, we have a double header due to this pod's speed. Also, try and guess which deck I shouldn't have let on camera. With that being said, let's check out the pod today. First, we have Jack on Acererak Red Sun, a combo deck that seeks to cheapen Acererak, accrue value through dungeons, and win by assembling a line to make Acererak free. Noah on Najeela Warrior Queen, a mid-range deck that uses combat and interaction to pull ahead before winning with one of many one-card combos. Aiden on Obosh Group Slug, which seeks to play hate pieces and use its commander to break parity. And finally, Cody on Cazur Ukkima Food Chain, which seeks to assemble a food chain line and win with Ukkima. And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let us begin. And for those of you in the Ames area, stick around to find out how you can get 10% off your next Mayhem Ames purchase. Cody draws and plays a tropical island for turn. He passes. Jack draws and plays a swamp for turn. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Mox Opal. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He casts a Jet Medallion. He cracks Jeweled Lotus to cast his commander, Acererak the Archlich. It enters and returns to Jack's hand, and Jack ventures into Lost Mine of Phandelver, scrying one to the bottom. Jack recasts Acererak. It returns to hand and he ventures, creating a treasure token. Jack passes. Noah draws and plays a Marsh Flats for turn. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring of his own. Noah passes. Aiden draws and plays a Command Tower for turn. They cast a Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. They cast a Talisman of Indulgence. They cast Demonic Tutor. In response, Cody casts Brainstorm, drawing 3 and putting 2 back on top. Still in response, Cody pays a life to cast Force of Will, exiling Mystical Tutor. Demonic Tutor is countered, and Aiden passes. Cody draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Cody passes. Jack draws and starts his turn off by casting Urza's Incubator. It resolves, and Jack names Wizard as it enters. He casts Acererak. It returns to hand and he ventures, draining the table for 1. He recasts Acererak. It returns to hand and he ventures, drawing a card and completing the dungeon. Jack plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up a swamp onto the battlefield. He recasts Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures into Dungeon of the Mad Mage, gaining a life. Jack passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Noah casts Enlighten Tutor. He fetches up a Chrome Mox onto the top of his library. Noah draws and plays a Taiga. He casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Dothy Voidwalker. He casts his commander, Najeela, the Blade Blossom. Noah passes. Aiden draws and plays a Prismatic Vista. They crack it, paying a life, and fetching up a swamp onto the battlefield. They cast Seething Song, adding 5 red mana. They cast their commander, Obosh, the Prey Piercer. Aiden passes. Cody draws and plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. He casts Cabal Ritual. In response, Noah casts Vampiric Tutor. Noah fetches up a card onto the top of his deck and loses 2 life. Cabal Ritual resolves and Cody adds 3 black mana. He casts Culling Ritual. It resolves and Cody adds 6 black mana. He casts Praetor's Grasp, targeting Jack. He fetches up a card face down from Jack's deck. He casts the card, which is Necropotence. He activates Necropotence, paying 10 life to exile the top 10 cards of his library. At his end step, Cody adds the exiled cards to his hand. He moves to exile and passes. Jack draws and starts his turn by casting Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures, scrying 1 to the bottom. He recasts Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures, creating a treasure token. He cracks the treasure to recast Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures, scrying 2, 1 to the top and 1 to the bottom. Jack passes. Noah draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts Mindblade Render. Noah moves to combat and attacks Cody with Najeela. Najeela triggers and creates a 1/1 warrior token, tapped and attacking Cody. Cody takes the hit, and Noah loses a life and draws from Mindblade Render. Noah passes. Aiden draws and moves to combat, attacking Cody with Obosh. Cody takes it, and in their second main phase, Aiden casts Null Rod. It resolves, and Aiden passes. Cody starts his turn by casting Mana Crypt. He plays a Morphic Pool for turn. He exiles Elvish Spirit Guide to help cast Demonic Tutor. It resolves, and Cody fetches up a card into his hand. Cody passes. At the end of Cody's turn, Jack pays 4 life to cast Snuff Out, targeting Najeela. In response, Noah casts Veil of Summer. Veil resolves, Noah draws, and Snuff Out fizzles. The turn moves to Jack. Jack draws and floats a black. He plays Lake of the Dead, sacrificing the tapped swamp when it enters. He floats another black and activates Lake of the Dead, sacrificing the swamp to add 4 black mana. He casts Grim Tutor. It resolves and Jack fetches up a card into his hand and loses 3 life. He casts Carnival of Souls. It resolves and Jack casts Acererak. It enters, Jack adds a black and takes the damage through Carnival, and Acererak returns to his hand. He ventures, creating 2 1/1 skeletons, and Jack adds 2 black and takes 2 damage from Carnival of Souls. Jack casts Prism Ring, naming black as it enters. With Prism Ring, Carnival of Souls, and Urza's Incubator on the field, Jack can now cast Acererak infinitely. As Jack moves to present a loop, Cody asks a dreaded question: do you draw cards? Jack answers yes, and Cody flashes in a Notion Thief. Backing up, Jack casts Acererak twice, venturing twice, scrying 3 to the bottom in Deep Mines and drawing Cody 3 cards when venturing into Mad Wizard's lair. Jack then begins venturing through Dungeon of the Mad Mage again, gaining a life, scrying 1 to the bottom, creating a treasure token, scrying 2, 1 to the top and 1 to the bottom, and finally venturing into Runestone Caverns, exiling the top 2 cards of his library, one being Feed the Swarm. Jack casts Feed the Swarm, destroying Notion Thief and losing 4 life. With Notion Thief destroyed, Jack presents a loop of venturing through Lost Mine of Phandelver. With Dark Pool draining the table and enough cards in deck, the table sees the writing on the wall, and Jack wins the game. For those of you in the Ames area who stuck around, come to Mayhem Comics in Ames tomorrow and ask for the YouTube discount. You'll be asked the question, who won Game 1? Answer correctly and you can get 10% off your purchase. Cody draws and starts his turn by paying 2 life to cast Cataxian Probe, targeting Noah. He looks at Noah's hand and draws. He plays a Polluted Delta and passes. Jack draws and plays a Swamp for turn. He casts a Blood Pet. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. Jack passes. Noah draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs for turn. He also passes. Aiden draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. They cast a turn 1 Null Rod. Jack curses his luck, and Aiden passes. At the end of Aiden's turn, Cody cracks Polluted Delta, paying a life and fetching up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. The turn moves to Cody. Cody draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He passes. Jack draws and plays a Swamp for turn. He sacrifices Blood Pet to help cast Heartless Summoning. He casts his commander, Acererak, the Archlich. In response, Noah cracks Verdant Catacombs, paying a life and fetching up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Brainstorm, drawing 3 and putting 2 back on top. Acererak resolves and returns to Jack's hand, with Jack venturing into Dungeon of the Mad Mage, gaining 1 life. Jack passes. Noah draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts Mindblade Render. Noah passes. Aiden draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs of their own. They crack it, paying a life, and fetch up a Badlands onto the battlefield. They cast Seething Song, adding 5 red mana. They cast their commander, Obosh the Prey Piercer. The table wonders if anyone actually shuffled their decks, and Aiden passes. Cody draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He exiles Elvish Spirit Guide to help cast Destiny Spinner. Cody passes. Jack draws and plays a Swamp for turn. He, predictably, casts Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures, scrying 1 to the bottom. He recasts Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures, making Mindblade Render unable to attack until his next turn. He recasts Acererak. It returns to hand and Jack ventures, scrying 2 to the bottom. Jack passes. Noah draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He casts a Lotus Petal. He cracks Bloodstained Mire, paying a life and fetching up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Najeela the Blade Blossom. In response, Cody casts Mana Drain, countering Najeela. Noah passes. Aiden draws and plays an Urza Saga for turn. It enters and moves to Chapter 1. Aiden moves to combat and attacks Cody with Obosh. Cody takes the hit, and in their second main phase, Aiden casts Cemetery Gatekeeper. It resolves and exiles Blood Pet from Jack's graveyard. Aiden passes. Cody draws and adds 3 colorless through Mana Drain. He puts an Overgrown Tomb into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black mana. He casts Time Twister. In response, Jack pays 4 life to cast Snuff Out, destroying Cemetery Gatekeeper. Time Twister resolves, and everyone shuffles their hand and graveyard into their deck and draws 7 cards. Cody casts a Lotus Petal. He casts Demonic Consultation. It resolves, and Cody names Food Chain. He exiles the top 6 cards of his library, one of which is Eternal Scourge, and exiles until he finds Food Chain. He casts Food Chain. He activates Food Chain, exiling Destiny Spinner, adding 3 green mana. Cody casts Eternal Scourge from exile. With no responses, Cody presents a loop of exiling Eternal Scourge to Food Chain and recasting it from exile, netting 1 mana each time. With Ukkima as a repeatable drain, the table sees the writing on the wall, and Cody wins the game. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to catch future videos, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.